Hi, I'm Monica with the Stop Mandated Shunning Project, where we call out cults and high-control religions that use organized ostracism to control their members. Let's talk about cults and parental alienation. How do high-control religions break the bonds between parents and children and between grandparents and grandchildren? This little honey jar is one of my most treasured possessions, and it belonged to my Grandpa Gene. Of my 4 grandparents, he was the only one who was not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and therefore my entire life I was taught that he was not a good person. I think I was about 10 years old when we attended Grandpa Gene's funeral, and I remember how indifferent my mother was to the death of her father. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in heaven or hell. They believe in simply no longer existing or having the opportunity to be resurrected in a paradise earth, but only the faithful are resurrected. I remember my mom saying very nonchalantly that she didn't think her dad would be resurrected because he had been unfaithful. For Jehovah's Witnesses, unfaithful is anyone who's not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Growing up, Grandpa Gene was the one family member who did not love God or the Bible enough to become a baptized Jehovah's Witness. He persecuted my grandmother because she used the car so much to go to meetings and go out in the ministry that Jehovah's Witnesses are very well known for. He would check the mileage on the car and be upset that she was doing so much driving. And it was a lot of driving because Jehovah's Witnesses go to the Kingdom Hall 4 or 5 times a week, and they also drive all over the countryside preaching if they live in a rural area like my grandmother did. I'm sure it was a huge strain on the family finances. One thing cults do very well is monopolize all of a person's time. So when my grandmother converted, she went from having a normal family life with Grandpa Gene and their 7 children to being gone multiple evenings a week, being gone both days of every weekend because that's what is required by Jehovah's Witnesses. My grandparents also had to transition from having many friends in common to my grandmother and the children leaving my grandfather out of social events because he's worldly and a non-believer, and they were only supposed to associate with other Jehovah's Witnesses. So now I realize that when my grandmother became one of Jehovah's Witnesses, my grandfather was basically kicked out of his own family. No wonder he was unhappy. No wonder he complained. By the time I was born, Grandpa Gene had basically given up. He had accepted his role as an outsider in his own family. He always seemed tired and sad. I remember him being horrified when one of my aunts was disfellowshipped and shunned by the entire family, and he stood by her, and thank goodness he did, because he was the only family member she did not lose. I have one really nice memory of my Grandpa Gene. One weekend when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my grandparents babysat me for a weekend. I was sitting in the kitchen at this tiny little table with them, and we were having cereal, and Grandpa Gene took out this honey jar, and he showed me how to take the wand and roll up the honey, and then unroll it and drizzle the honey all over my cereal. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I always remember that. And somehow when we were looking at my grandparents' estate after they both passed, I was able to snatch up this honey jar because no one else particularly cared about it. Now that I've left the Jehovah's Witness religion, I've reviewed my memories and I have completely revised my view of my Grandpa Gene. What about you? If you have recently left a high control religious group that has an us versus them, good versus evil mentality, have you completely revised your view of a parent or grandparent? And if that person is still alive, have you been able to reconnect with them or mend your relationship? Please let us know in the comments below. And remember, the research now being conducted at Roehampton University on faith-based mandated shunning will document the harm, including the psychological violence of parental alienation.